one of the things, interesting things he said was in response to someone who said, so you could be like 90% Christian, for instance, if
Yeah.
you were a Taoist, for instance, maybe you follow many of the same principles of Christianity, but maybe not fully as Christian. You don't follow some principles, and so you're 90% Christian effectively. But he was like, he prioritizes Christianity above other religions because he thinks that although things like Taoism and maybe Islam, even whatever, are pretty good, but like maybe 90%, their Christianity is another iteration above that in terms of it just adds a bit more in terms of quality of story or whatever you might say. And so he says he's a Christian, and that's not to say that the Taoist part he's not also kind of Taoist as well. But he's, I guess, if you're choosing a label, you choose the one which you think is the best version, and that might only be 10% better.
Mm. Yeah, but with this line of thought, if you're saying you're Christian because you're following these 20 things, 10 or 20 things, let's say, does that mean that if you don't follow all of them, you're not a Christian and you're going to hell? Like, I'm not.
Well, some Christians would say you aren't. You can follow 99% of Christianity, but if you don't accept that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, then you're not a Christian. That does seem to be the most critical claim, which needs to be fully accepted to be classed, for oneself to class oneself as Christian.
I think people would argue on that very often in the Bible, a lot of the stories of the Bible, even by Christians, are interpreted as metaphors or myths or stories, or not exactly factually historical. How do we know that this was truly a historical truth that we have to all accept, and not all the other 10 other, or how many
Well,
other?
that's why Jordan Peterson's version of Christianity is perhaps more compelling to a lot of would-be atheists, because you feel like if you're not Christian, you might have to define yourself as atheist. If you're not religious, the only other option really is atheist slash agnostic, I guess. But yeah, but he brings in a new, not a new definition of religion, because it's not something that he's just started. It's actually got, he said himself, it's just got a longer tradition than you might think. Interpreting the biblical stories or any other religious stories as symbolic or psychological. And he doesn't see a difference between psychological and spiritual. So it's not like you could say, oh, he's interpreting them as psychological and stripping them back from spirituality and religion. But actually, he would say, no, in the final analysis, truth is truth. And there is one truth, and that's the claim which scientists hold to. Science comes out of Christianity, and that's the claim monotheistic Christianity and other monotheistic religions, even Taoism, you could say, with the Tao being the equivalent to God, one system with principles that underlies everything rather than a chaos or many different types of gods or truth claims, truth principles, things which cause it. It's ultimately one in the final analysis.
Yeah, I think the problem, I actually have an issue with the whole premise. Like, the problem is that with these Jubilee debates, you don't have enough time to flesh out this kind of. There's
Yeah,
no room for nuance at all. You know.
it does annoy me a little bit before, Matt, because sometimes it's getting a bit juicy, and then you just
Yeah, and the
hope it
person gets
doesn't get
voted
voted
out.
out. Yeah, but it also
Exactly.
makes it exciting in some ways, because it's good for our dopamine reduced brains, because yeah, it's just one thing after the other, and you don't get bored.
No, don't get me wrong. I do think it's highly entertaining content, but in terms of changing people's minds, debates like this do nothing. I think for neither
Yeah, but
side.
I don't think even long-term debates change minds. I'm
No, I don't
quite,
think debates. That's what I'm saying. A debate isn't, to me at least, is not is not a good way to kind of propagate ideas and kind of exchange ideas, or kind of um, produce good in that sense. I think debates can be good when you're trying to kind of maybe set up policies and laws, and all that is really good. You know, when you have political um, goals and stuff. But when you're trying to kind of get people to understand things without dialogue. I think you need dialogue. Otherwise, you end up having angry exchanges, egos, and all that was involved. You saw it yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and
I
that
was, I
happens
was
a lot.
very, I was very
Mm.
impressed in how Jordan Peterson and the majority of the atheists, how articulate they were, how quick they were with their responses, and like it certainly made me feel a little bit stupid at times. It's they're yeah, just amazing how switched on they were. It was really good to watch in that regard.
I know why they were so switched on, these guys. Most of these guys are content creators on TikTok who
Interesting.
this is their job, debating all day long on live, on TikTok
Right.
live
Okay.
people. There's
Interesting. I didn't know that.
many of them at least. I recognize at least 2 to 3 people who either make content on TikTok or are on TikTok live and they debate people.
Yeah, so that explains why they're very good debaters. But I think this is why words really mean very little because it's about how you live life, and probably many of these young people who are great at debating are not great at living life. Not to say they're bad or worse than the
Mm,
average person, but I wouldn't say all this extra knowledge necessarily translates into living a more meaningful or happy life.
mm. No, I wouldn't say so, and I think the I liked his first prompt. I like Jordan Peterson's first kind of claim the most. I would say for me, where he said atheists don't know the God they're rejecting, and obviously
Yeah,
the problem is the guys that came up are quite versed with, I'd say, probably a lot of theological discussions, debates, concepts, etc., etc. But I think when it comes to general population, I'd say a lot of young people and a lot of people in general haven't done any kind of um, spiritual exploration, neither personally or through a religion, which does actually make them ignorant. They just say, oh, yeah, I don't care about God because don't know anything about God, or I don't care about God. So I would say he is kind of right on the premise of
mm.
atheists don't know the God they're rejecting, even though the people in the room were quite versed. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can be very versed without necessarily having any experience of what you're rejecting. And yeah, not to say necessarily psychedelics is what is a way to see God, but I would wager that if you made all the people, the atheists in the room, take a heavy dose of ayahuasca, then they might rethink exactly what they're refuting in terms of thinking there might be something beyond their materialistic mindset in terms of thinking that rational thought can get us everywhere and explain everything. I
Mm,
think they would be on general less sure of their claim. So because the problem with reason is it
mm,
makes you very prideful in your view of that reason can solve everything, and it makes you feel like, oh, you're not claiming this because it's someone's opinion. You're claiming this because this is true, because reason says so, and so that can make you
mm.
really sure of your opinion, and that actually seems to create a lot of problems, I'd say.
Yeah, and that's the problem with this debate kind of format. People were trying to really pin him down on like um, semantics and sound bites and kind of like things that obviously you can make a statement which can be true, but there is a lot of nuance in it as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciated the debate in terms of trying to pin him down on some difficult areas. Like, I think he was quite brave to do it because he doesn't have to do this stuff. But like, and it's not easy to come up with good answers straight away when, however good your argument is. When someone throws stuff at you, it's difficult. But yeah, I think overall he did a very good job. Like, a lot of people watching will say, "Oh, he's just slipping out of the traps that they set him." But yeah, I think I don't know. You might have a different view, and you might be able to have some examples, but I think he did a pretty good job.
mm, yeah, I do think he did a good job all in all. I just think very often he would come across, at least to me, as very kind of aggressive with his answers. Obviously, some of them were not very nice to him
Yeah, sometimes you
as
have to
well.
meet aggression with aggression, and
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people admire about Jordan Peterson. Obviously, I'm probably to the left of him, but politically, but I think what part of his appeal is he's not afraid to be direct when he feels that something is correct morally. He stands up for it and doesn't take any prisoners, and I think that's something we probably need more of in the world. Obviously, yeah, people being very certain of things which they might be wrong about can be problematic, but also just being lukewarm in whatever you believe is problematic as well.
Oh yeah, I do. I can definitely acknowledge that he has a lot of conviction behind his words. He's very specific, both with his
Yeah,
definitions and with what he says and believes. It just
that's
comes
one of his
across.
10 rules for
Yeah.
life. I think I remember I read that book about 8 years ago or a long time ago. And yeah, one of his rules for life is be specific in what you say, something along those lines. And I think that is pretty good advice. And he
Hmm.
is very, very articulate.
Hmm. What did you think of the second um, claim of his, that morality and purpose cannot be found within science?
Well, yeah, I think generally, yes,
Hmm.
morality and purpose can't be found within science because science is just studying of things, physical things. And as many philosophers point out, you can't get from an is to an ought. So something might be the case in nature. Something might be blue, doesn't mean we should treat it a different way. Also, that comes all the way into like I guess even debates such as abortion or whatever. Like just because this is what happens during abortion doesn't actually make it right or wrong. You have to infer something else to make that thing right or wrong. So even though it's very uncomfortable, killing is not necessarily right or wrong if you're just going from a scientific point of view, because killing in nature happens all the time. So you have to have
Hmm.
some sort of value hierarchy or something which defines value in terms of it can't just be all quantity. So science is all about quantity and not about quality.
Hmm. I don't know if I fully embrace that from my side, because I think that morality can definitely arise as a product of our evolution, in a sense.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
no, but I would argue that's not necessarily. It's that it arises out of our evolution, probably because it's true beyond evolution in the way of you could imagine that probably any successful species in another part of the universe would come up with a lot of the same principles, such as courage being something valuable compared to not being courageous. The same with being compassionate, probably produces better societies than not being compassionate. So, compassion and courage are two examples of things which would probably be likely true. Obviously, we can't know of any culture in
mm,
anywhere in the universe, which then suggests that it's built into the very fabric of the universe, like the laws of physics, that things like courage and love are things which transcend time and space. Because wherever in time and space they are the things which produce a better and more heaven-like, Jordan Peterson would say, society than their opposites.
mm, yeah, but you can still make the argument that the fact that someone tapped into this in the conversation. They were saying, we're social beings. Obviously, doing good for your for your community means that your community will thrive. You will thrive. Therefore, your community has the highest chance of survival. Therefore, this is kind of how more morally just creatures, or not creatures, humans back in the day survived and propagated, and therefore morality has been and empathy has evolved more and more because it's been selected evolutionary as a trait within us to to come along.
Yeah, but it's been selected. above other things because it is valuable to creating a good society. Whether those individuals in the society are ultimately selfish for acting that way, I think is besides the point. It's selfishness and selflessness are divine in some ways, but I think in terms of creating a good society, if you're really wise about it, and people like Marcus Aurelius would say this, if you're the best way of being selfless is to be selfish, the best way to be selfish is to be selfless. So in terms of if you're like you could pursue your own whims, for instance, and be selfish, but that would probably create problems for yourself and others if you pursue them to a great extent where it causes problems for yourself and your others and other people. And yeah, it's that
But that's
that
what I'm
would not
saying.
be the best way to be selfish. And so, what is the best way to live life? It definitely has something to do, I think, with selflessness. And
Mm.
then you could say the selfish approach to life is a selfless approach to life, and vice versa. And so, there's not that distinction there.
Yeah, but I don't think people in greater scales think of it this would be thinking of it in this way. I think if you were to go back in time when we were much more tribal, much more um, isolated in small communities, people who you know wanted to kill members of their community would probably be killed by the community. Therefore, they didn't survive. Those traits that they might have had, they just simply were not traits that ended up surviving natural selection. Someone would say you don't need God. That's what I'm. Someone would argue counterly to that you don't need God in the equation to attribute the good things that have come out of humanity and our morality.
Well, yeah, like yeah, I'm probably going to do a sort of Jordan Peterson esque twist of that to say that Jesus said that he basically undercut the Ten Commandments, or said that actually there are really only two commandments, and all the Ten Commandments are reflections of the two commandments, and the two commandments are to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think some would argue
Mm.
that those two claims are actually very similar. And so the loving of your neighbor as yourself, that is in a way of loving God. But yeah, it is tricky. But I think you could define perhaps God there as maybe like the social principle, which allows humans or other animals to organize in a way which produces a more heavenly like state in the earth and the universe than yeah than and takes us away from the more hellish version of events.
I mean, I think at some point in the debate, Jordan Peterson defined God as consciousness, which I thought was
I
was
didn't hear that. I
interesting.
think it was conscience, maybe. Do you
Conscious? Was it
conscience
conscience or
rather than
oh
consciousness? I
conscience?
could be wrong,
Maybe
but
conscious. No,
yeah,
maybe as
because
you
he was
said, it
drawing
maybe it
on
was
Cardinal
conscious.
Newman and Isaiah
Ah, there you go,
and Job. I
conscience.
think it was yeah saying the conscience, which I'm not sure he was right to be so certain in all of their definitions. I haven't looked at, but yeah, I think some probably would argue, for instance, Job and Isaiah they might not just say it's just conscience, but yeah, we'll go. Yeah, what are you saying on conscience?
No, I just found it interesting because again, um, I don't know if I would um like follow this kind of line of thought, but I wondered if you had any thoughts on that as God as being conscience.
Yeah, well, I guess that translates to what I was just saying about Jesus' two commandments of loving God, so adhering to your conscience, the voice in your head which guides you, hopefully correctly, and it guides you to do the second commandment, which is to love others as yourself.
Again, I don't know though, because my conscience and your conscience, I presume, has been something that has come out of your societal slash development as a person.
I would disagree with that.
I,
Now,
I would argue. How would you disagree?
okay, so
Tell me.
yes, there does seem to be a form of conscience which comes from societal condition and the opinions of other people around you, um, and that also we could call that as a version of God, which is actually not God, but the version of the opinions of other people around you. So you could think of God will hate me for doing this, but actually you're really thinking the society will hate you for doing this, whatever act it is that supposedly goes against biblical or societal norms. So yes, there are lots of conditioning that we get conditioned from evolution and society, but I think there is also such a thing as conscience when you do manage to drop all that, which is not necessarily easy to drop all that, but I think you can drop a lot of it, and a lot of psychological therapy is a process of dropping that. And people succeed in that to varying extents. You could argue some, for instance, Buddhists or Christian monks or whatever, manage to cut a lot of that conditioning down to almost nothing, and they would call themselves enlightened. And you could argue with that or not, but there does seem to be some people who are able to drop a lot of conditioning. And then if you drop conditioning, does that mean then there's no conscience? Is there no morality? And I would say that actually dropping of conditioning, love comes forth. They're not needing to treat yourself as necessarily better than other people, and just the joyousness of helping other people, for it just feels right. And I think most people can tap into that, even if you haven't reduced your conditioning. It's just the problem is a lot of people who haven't reduced their conditioning think of that as, they think of the loving tendency that we have as something which has just been conditioned into us. And to add to this point, sorry, I'm going long.
Mm.
And so religious experiences, and you could include psychedelics in this as well, although that's obviously controversial, but say religious experiences, they produce certain experiences and people are left changed after them. And often they say that they feel more empathetic. And I would suggest that, yeah, that is suggests there is something beyond just the evolution which has produced it.
Mm. My problem with this is that I would say, for example, would you have the same conscience, the same level of conscience, if you weren't born here, for example, if you were born in the middle of nowhere, for example, and you had, if you're, for example, born in an isolated tribe that as soon as they saw other people, killed them and ate them, I don't think you'd have the same conscience, you know?
Yeah, no, that's possibly true, and I guess you could make the argument that even with psychedelics, people have taken psychedelics to go and kill people. So people, I don't know, I haven't looked into this, but they say that the Viking berserkers were taking
Oh,
psychedelics,
yeah.
and also, yeah, tribes people in the Amazons were probably taking psychedelics and going hunting after animals or other humans, because it accentuates your mental acuity, I guess, or your visual acuity or whatever acuity. Um, yeah, so that's potentially a valid point, but yeah,
Mm.
what was your question again?
No, my main issue with it is when you say that it's not all social conditioning, is that we kind of we kind of know that people in different parts of the world will have a different, depending on where they're born and the societies they live in, would have different versions of conscience.
Well, yeah, they would have different versions, but there would be a lot of commonality as well. And I would say compassion for one's group of people, which could be big or small, depending on how you define people. That the compassion does come out in nearly all people's wherever they are in the world, and perhaps the problem is shutting ourselves down, our conscience, to extending into terms of treatment of people who are look different than us.
No, yeah, I agree on that, but again, I would table that to natural selection. I would attribute that to our natural selection, wanting to for our group to flourish because it will help us to flourish. I'm just playing a little bit devil's advocate, not to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that there is nothing there. Um,
yeah. No,
I'm just being a little bit Richard Dawkins on you.
yeah, no. It's useful to have a yeah, someone doing a different opinion, because it does make you think more, because these are things which can be easy to take for granted or get caught up in your own thoughts. So yeah, I don't know if you have any
But
other
no,
points
no,
on that.
no. I know there isn't a lot more, like, it's hard to expand on it in a different way, and I understand that. So I'm not gonna say more, because I understand where you're coming from, and I definitely think there is something there that is also intrinsic, but there is a lot of, maybe there is a little bit of both at the end. Okay, maybe I'll be a fence sitter and say yes, maybe it's part of our evolution, because it's been advantageous for us, but maybe there is a spiritual slash God implication in it as well. But let's table that. I was gonna go into the. I really like the other prompt that you also talked
Hmm,
about,
what was it?
that everybody worships. Jordan Peterson said in his third
Yeah,
prompt in that discussion, that everybody worships something even though they might not know it. And I thought that was really good,
yeah, yeah,
because I think what's very fast becoming the new religion is politics for a lot of people.
yeah, and it provides a lot of the things which religion provided traditionally. One of those things being community. So there's
Yeah,
so much
exactly.
community and conscience just really seem to be just intertwined with each other on many different levels. But yeah, like politics, yeah, does seem to be people seem to be religious about it, and they
I know.
can't see the other side. Oftentimes, is they literally can't turn themselves around to look in a different perspective,
Yeah,
and that's the same true for the left and the right,
yeah,
and
yeah,
probably the
for
same
sure.
for nearly everyone to some extent. Although a lot of people probably would like to think of themselves as not having this problem, it does seem incredibly pervasive.
It is. You see it how it has shaped like discussions in social media and in the political scene on how people have effectively replaced religious dogma for political dogma effectively. So one side says something and they think that this is the way. Any other way would mean, the end of society as they know it, and the other side says the same.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's language of heaven and hell and judgment and whatever coming into politics, and yeah, I think generally that's unhelpful. But that type of religious language is very impactful on our brains, which up to very recently were conditioned on a religious point of view, a religious perspective of life.
mm, yeah, I wonder if it has become, if this terminology, and as you said, this kind of way of thinking about politics was used intentionally by political parties to make people much more fanatizing their base.
Well, yeah, they're using psychological tricks effectively. Like
Mm,
marketers know all about these cognitive biases of humans, of which there are many, and the best marketers will be able to pull those strings better than other marketers and sell more products. The same goes for politics, and if you can pull the strings better, then you're going to get in power, and you'll have more
mm,
money to keep getting better at pulling the strings.
mm. Yeah. Oh, during that segment of the debate, I thought people went into some weird ideas about, the Virgin Mary and stuff, and
Yeah, I thought that was
worshiping
an
her.
interesting point. I wasn't sure what to think about it. So, Jordan Peterson was saying, like Jordan Peterson's opponent was saying, "Do you worship Mary?"
I wasn't sure where he was going with it. Did you get any idea?
So Jordan Peterson's opponent was saying that you worship Mary if you're a Catholic to some
Mm.
extent. So is she a god then, or did you think that's what he was saying? I
Oh, I
wasn't
see what you mean.
100%.
Yeah. I think to a degree, he was implying that it kind of undermines like the concept of one God. Maybe in a way, if you're saying that you worship also Mary, and if you worship Jesus, and if you worship the Holy Spirit, and are you replacing the one God that Christianity is so much fixated about to other figures as well? Is that taking away maybe from the message? I don't know, or is it maybe hypocritical in some way? I don't know. Maybe that's what they were getting at.
Well, yeah, and I think that's perhaps a valid point, but I don't think it would be something you could really attack Jordan Peterson for, because he's not the typical Christian, if he's a Christian at all. So, yeah, like you could worship Mary, I think and other figures, so saints or whatever, and in a way, the monotheistic religion turns into something which is kind of polytheistic in some sense, in
Mm,
terms, because you could say famously polytheistic religion is Hinduism, and a lot of the
mm,
Hindu gods, whether a lot of the people on the ground know it, are sort of seen by philosophers as reflections of the unknown divine principle, which is very much like how God is defined by theologians in Christianity, called Brahman.
mm,
So yeah, like if you got like figures like Mary and saints, I think some Christians obviously would disagree with themselves on this with other Christians. Is should you be worshipping Mary, for instance? And there's so many idols of Mary, and
mm,
idol worship was forbidden in the Old Testament, and many Christians have had debates over whether idolatry is ever justified. But yeah,
mm,
like you worshipping the idol is problematic if you're worshipping the idol. But if you take it in terms of these are these are idols and perhaps real people in history as well, but they're not something we should worship. They are symbols, even if they were real people. They are symbols
mm,
which point us towards the real thing, rather than actually being ends in themselves. And so I think Jordan Peterson's view would be probably, but yeah, they're just if used correctly, they're just finger pointers, and so you don't worship the
mm,
finger, you look
mm.
at what it's pointing at.
Yeah, I think that points well to the kind of ties well with the later section of the discussion at the end, where he kind of picked a girl out of the audience to and kind of come and discuss. And her premise was that Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that Bible intended. During the discussion, he kind of mentioned how can people interpret which parts of the Bible are, as Jordan Peterson as well mentioned, like poetry, metaphors, facts, commandments, ways to live by. How can people know which ones are which? Because if you don't do them, you're effectively um, screwed, and you're going to hell. And Jordan Peterson, I felt, did not have a good answer to that.
Yeah, it's whether there could be a good answer to that. Like I'm not sure whether there could be, because there is many different genres, and some are more literal than others, and some are more metaphorical than others. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't have been compiled into a text together, because they both yield spiritual transformation, however you want to put it, whether it's spiritual or psychological transformation. They've probably been kept around because they were useful to people. Um, and yeah, like obviously interpretation is a problem, and yeah, if you perhaps get interpretation wrong, then you might be going to hell. But it's yeah, like that's, I guess most Christians would say, yeah, there's some metaphorical stuff in the Bible, some literal stuff, but basically you just need to believe that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and you'll be saved.
I think Jordan Peterson really loves the idea of the cross and the burden a lot. Like I've heard him mention this kind of concept, not in its literal sense, not necessarily talking about Jesus on the cross, but about us as people needing to take our struggles like Jesus did on the cross, carry them, live with them, and kind of um, like sacrifice in a way for the greater good. I suppose. I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, to aim upwards and to believe there is something uh, in terms of a value hierarchy, and you can choose to do a better thing than a worse thing in each moment in your life. Yeah, no, I'm sympathetic to that argument.
Mm.
I'm not sure what was your total question.
No, I didn't have a specific question. It was more like that Jordan Peterson. I don't think he believes. I don't think from what he says he believes necessarily in the literal version of
Well, yeah,
like
and yeah, but the example of that which is most pertinent is Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, and like he says in the debate, I believe something along the lines of, "Yeah, I don't know that. How could
yeah
anyone really know that?"
yeah yeah
And so it's unfair for the atheists to pin him down on something because
mm,
it's like not something he claims to know, because really no one can know that for sure, because it's if it is a moment that happened in history, and history is famously unreliable, you can have a lot of evidence for that happening, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean then he even if he got resurrected, doesn't necessarily mean it was for to save the sins of humanity. Doesn't necessarily mean it was the Son of God,
mm,
the one Son of God, which are our central Christian truth claims. Obviously, it could mean that, but as modern observers, we've got no way of claiming one thing over the other, because our reference is the Bible, which
mm,
any historian taking a historical approach would say is going to be biased.
mm. But that's the problem, I think, for a lot of people, a lot of young people who are quite interesting in facts and logic, as people say these days. They find this not good enough. You know what I mean? They would say,
Yeah, well, facts and
you
logic are
can say that
never
yes,
going to be good
okay,
enough.
we should pick up the suffering in our shoulders, not avoid it, not try and run from it, but like at the same time, uh, people will say that, um, like Jordan Peterson will say in this case, that you'll see some things. Um, you'll see the goodness in something by the fruits of the by the fruits they're bearing, something like that.
Yeah,
He says something along these lines, and I thought, yeah, but that's not necessarily a good enough argument, saying how how good for us it is to not run from our suffering, blah blah.
it depends on your definition of God, whether you believe that what we mean by God is a guy with a white beard in the sky, which maybe some Christians do believe that, but I think many Christians don't.
Hmm. Yeah, but I just think that that's not enough for a lot of people. Even if you say that, yeah, God isn't this bearded man in the sky. um it doesn't People don't subscribe to the idea of that omnipotent, omnipresent, all good force that affects their lives. I think that is what people are the most resistant about.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are resistant to that. I would suggest, and I probably think Jordan Peterson would probably also suggest, haven't really tried taking this approach seriously in terms of
Mm,
bearing your load and aiming upwards. And yeah, it might get worse before it gets better. And growth is not necessarily a thing which is always getting better. Like it's like stock market growth, it goes up and down and up and down. But the idea is the faith in that approach over the long term probably produces better results than the absence of that faith in that process.
mm. Yeah, I can get behind that, I suppose. I can see, as you said, that um, the faith can be the cornerstone for that upward kind of growth. But a lot of people would argue that we don't need that.
Well, I think you need faith to follow the process, and you may confuse me by saying faith as in faith in the guy with a white beard in the sky, but that's not what I mean by faith. And maybe there are other versions of faith, but faith in the process of what Jesus laid out as a way of managing your life and aiming upwards and taking on suffering.
Mm,
Having because there's not maybe there's an argument now, there's evidence and you don't need faith, there's evidence that this approach to life is probably going to produce people who are more content, happy, and peaceful than not adopting this approach. And there probably are scientific studies, but at least for most of human history, and probably still now, you still need faith, because it's faith that moves us rather than just facts.
Hmm. Yeah, I suppose that is true. Yeah. Um, do you think at the end of the debate, there were any people who had their minds changed by this as such, or they thought, because as far as I could tell from the comments, people did not think that Jordan Peterson did very well. They
Interesting.
found
Yeah,
his.
I think a lot of Jordan Peterson hate comes from actually not really understanding. And that, yeah, that might sound a bit derogatory, but I do think it's very easy to portray a straw man of Jordan Peterson, and he probably does lean into it a bit by trying to be deliberately ambiguous about whether he's Christian or not,
Mm,
so perhaps so he can not lose too much of his Christian or atheist audience. But I think he also genuinely sort of believes this halfway point, which is probably not as easy to defend as if because if you're a Christian, it's very easy to just take up the line of argument that all your friends have, and if you're an extreme atheist, that's another very easy argument to make. Doesn't
mm,
just because an argument's easy to make doesn't mean it's right. Obviously, because Christians can make a very easy argument which sounds kind of convincing, and atheists can make a very easy argument which sounds convincing. John Pearson has to sort of manage the nuance and sort of at the same time realizing the problems with language itself, which is the medium of debate. And yeah, I think he does actually a very good job, which hopefully over long term history will judge him well for that. Because yeah, in the short term, you probably get a lot of hate for this sort of argument. And this, I'm sounding like a big Jordan Peterson fan. Like I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but I do think this psychological stuff, I
mm.
think he's probably one of the most important figures of our time in relation to that.
A lot of people criticize his positions as him, at least online from what I read. People say that Jordan Peterson is very much afraid that without the framework of Christianity, we would be effectively at the mercy of nihilism, which would effectively
Yeah.
destroy us in the long run. And people
But he also did
pick.
point out that spiritual but not religious is a fast growing category of people. And it's arguably the case that a lot of people, if they left Christianity for whatever reason, perhaps they're probably psychologically inclined to be more religious. Like I think probably studies have shown that certain personality types are more likely to be religious. That does not mean religion is necessarily right or wrong, but it does mean certain types of people are more inclined to be religious for whatever reasons, more open to religion. And therefore, if they drop out of Christianity, some of them will go to extreme atheism, perhaps as a because yeah, when you're out of a cult, you perhaps go to the other extreme. But I think yeah, like I think spiritual but not religious would be perhaps the category that grows, rather than in the face of decline of a big religion, and so it wouldn't necessarily be nihilism. And I don't think a lot of the spiritual but not religious community are nihilistic.
No, I wouldn't say they are, but I think people believe that's what people's impression, at least, is of Jordan Peterson. That he feels like instead would have a huge growth of nihilism instead, which will effectively destroy society as we know it in a
Yeah,
way.
well, in the absence of traditional religion or religion as Jordan Peterson defines it, which I think
Mm,
is very much in line with spiritual, not but not religious. Um, in term, yeah, like obviously he's probably disagrees with a lot of, or rather, I'll put it the other way around. A lot of the spiritual but not religious community would not like to class Jordan Peterson as one of their membership, but I think there's a lot of similarities
mm,
between those sets of views actually. And so, yeah, I think he's right in terms of if you're not spiritual but not religious, and if you're not religious, then probably nihilism is the other option. And some people will take that seriously, that nihilism, and then some people will just carry on living their lives and not really think too much about philosophy.
mm. Maybe that's the. You'd hope that, yeah, like another dogma would take is not going to take the place of religion, whether it is a nihilism sort of dogma or any other
Yeah,
dogma.
I think, yeah, nihilism, with lack of belief in anything, is just unhuman in terms of humans. Even if they believe that and they got the best arguments in their heads, and when they portray to other people that nihilism is the case, they don't live like that generally. So this comes back to the idea of everyone worships something, one of Jordan
Mm,
Peterson's claims, and so you'll find nihilists probably worshipping other stuff, so prioritizing other stuff,
mm,
and whether that's food or whatever, TV, choosing one program to watch over another. And Jordan Peterson would say, actually, this value hierarchy that you still have is ultimately a hierarchy which at the top sets a unifying principle, which you could call God.
mm. Yeah, I do from a psychology perspective. I agree with that as well, from a psychological perspective as well. Um, so yeah, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. I don't know. I liked his premises. I didn't like how the debate was. I don't think this is a good format because whenever it gets juicy, as you said, they get voted down, and also people in debates like that, it's all about sound bites and about you know like destroying Jordan Peterson, which is like, that's what people are looking for, like, or Jordan Peterson destroys atheists, and it's not that doesn't help us at all to kind of progress ideas and bring ideas into maturity in my mind.
I think, although, yeah, the format is problematic, it got a lot of views, and I think that's something to be said in that. And like, obviously, it resonates with people. And I think it's not just about the fact that it's entertaining for one person destroys another. I think people have a genuine interest in this stuff from a spiritual point of view. So,
Mm, it
so
does
it's probably,
show,
probably
yeah.
got a lot of atheists watching it. And
Mm.
actually, why are they interested in that content rather than a cat video, whatever? So, Jordan
Yeah,
Peterson would say, you
yeah.
ultimately need to direct that belief, that value judgment, up to its proper place. But you still, the fact that that value judgment is there suggests that there is something at the top of it.
Mm. I agree. I would say anyone who hasn't watched the video, it's definitely worth watching. It's definitely a very interesting debate and discussions. Um, and I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in this sort of topic, to look it up. And yeah, I didn't have anything more from my side on this. I found it very interesting myself. That's why I wanted us to kind of have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I think he's certainly
Um,
the most interesting figure, well, one of the most interesting figures in this space at the moment. And it'll be interesting to see whether his ideas get adopted. It is very hard to tell exactly how influential he is. Obviously, he's very influential in terms of the number of views he gets, but his version of religion, um, which is perhaps not just his version, because it comes in the tradition of interpreting religion like that, but that version of religion, whether he's actually changing people in terms of how they live their lives, not just what they say. And yeah, I think it'd be interesting to know exactly how much of an impact he is having. But yeah, I would say probably in terms of his psychological advice, he probably makes people live, he helps people live more contented, fulfilled lives. Obviously, he's got a lot of political policies along with that, which some would argue cheapens his view, or at least turns people off to it.
mm,
But also, maybe someone who is strong minded necessarily has views and defends them, even if they're wrong views, like we're all human. And he's going to have some set of views, and probably a lot of people will disagree with him. And so to perhaps not have any political views just because you want to get your central point across
mm,
of this idea of God, then that's actually not living out your idea of God. In terms of his idea of God is to take this difficulty that he's faced with in terms of yeah, how he portrays himself in the world, and to conduct himself in a manner which is courageous, accurate, and tries to be truthful as much as he can do.
Mm. And in my mind, the more voices there are, prominent voices there are, both on the side of the theists and on the side of atheists, it's good at the end of the day because it creates more discourse and more dialogue and more conversation. So I think um,
Yeah, it
it's
might
good.
not change people's minds that much, but I guess at least it gives a more holistic version to
Mm,
your views. Like Charlie Munger, the famous investor, would say, you should be able to argue your opponent's viewpoint better than they can, just from a
mm,
selfish point of view of yeah, you by arguing for a certain point of view, or really seeing it, then you are able to, yeah, maybe change your view to some extent, and incorporate some of that truth, because you're not shutting yourself off from it suddenly because you don't want to see it. You're blind, and then you blind yourself to it, and that actually shoots yourself in the foot and probably ends up hurting other people often.
mm, exactly. So I like having debates from all sides, hearing debates from all sides, and also um, knowing that there are prominent voices that are listened to by a lot of people on both sides. So that's all I'm gonna say as a final note.
Yeah, I would be interested to because Jordan Peterson, perhaps if he's influenced by anyone more than anyone else, is influenced by Carl Jung,
Yeah, I know.
and
Yeah, I was gonna say.
it would be very interesting to see how Carl Jung, how much Carl Jung would agree with Jordan Peterson with. Obviously, probably a lot of the symbolic psychological stuff he would. It'd be just interested to see whether he would criticize him on any other factors. And I think a lot of the spiritual but not religious community, who are often fans of Carl Jung, would say, yeah, obviously he would. But
You know what we
I
need?
think that's just something we can't know. I think he could
Oh no,
well
we can.
be very
We
supportive
need
of Jordan Peterson, but we don't know.
we need um, an AI chatbot modeled after Carl Jung versus Jordan Peterson in one room.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, "Oh no, that's a nightmare." Like resurrecting someone from just
Yeah,
their ideas.
we want
But
all the ideas of Carl Jung in a specific chatbot tailored to have all his knowledge slash modeled after his personality versus Jordan Peterson in one
well,
room to
arguably,
debate.
you would have. But if you were to create an AI of anyone and do it accurately, Carl Jung might be the best bet to
Mm.
someone from history. So in terms of like Jesus, we know something about him, but we really don't know that much, and a lot of the stuff we do know could have been filtered through, or has been filtered through different writers and different, the message has been passed on. But Carl Jung, we actually have a lot of his
Mm.
dreams written down, so it's
Mm.
not like stuff he actually probably never intended to publish.
Yeah.
We also have his scientific publishings and all his writings on myth and whatever. So we have that side of his personality. Plus, we have the subconscious side of him, more than perhaps most people in history.
Mm.
And he left a whole lot of writings. So we got a lot of quantity as well. So if you were to create an AI of anyone and do it accurately, pretty accurately, you never get 100% accurately, but you might be able to get something which Carl Jung would be impressed with as like 98% Carl Jung in terms of portraying his ideas. Obviously,
Mm.
0%
Mhm.
Carl Jung, I would say, in terms of actually being Carl Jung. But yeah, like you could get someone which portrays his views, which would allow Jordan Peterson to have a good debate, and then yeah, you would see the gaps in the differences. But yeah,
That's what I thought. It would make for such good content, wouldn't it?
yeah, well, that's also the danger, is just doing stuff because it makes good content, and is that a good way to conduct ourselves as a species?
I
Who
know.
knows? Who knows? Maybe it is. Maybe I don't know.
I thought it was just a good final entertaining note to think about. But yeah.
Yeah.
Um let us know if anyone had any other thoughts watching this debate or listening to us, and we will see you again next time.